I'm Pete Howard, Professor of Practice and Executive Director of the Digital Business Institute here at the Questrom School of Business. I'm pleased to be joined today by Professor Andre Hajouf, Associate Professor of Information Systems and a leading expert on platform strategy and business models. Prior to Questrom, Professor Hajouf taught platform strategy courses at Harvard Business School and the MIT Sloan School of Management. His research and teaching are entirely focused on platform businesses, i.e. Airbnb, Alibaba, Amazon, Google, and their unique strategic challenges. He leverages the insights from his research to advise and angel invest in startups attempting to build platforms and marketplaces. He also consults with large companies seeking to turn their products into platforms. So today, with our expert, we're talking about Professor Hajouf's recent article, Platform Leakage, What Factors Make Leakage Worth, and What Marketplaces Can Do About It. So welcome, Andre.
Thank you, Pete. Thanks for having me. I guess this is our second session together, right?
It is, yes. We'll create a podcast next.
Exactly.
Thank you for joining. Really excited on this topic. And I see we're getting audience members joining. So again, please ask questions in the Q&A box and we'll jump in. So Andre, what exactly is platform leakage and why is it important?
Sure. So the notion of leakage is very specific to platforms or marketplaces, and it's the phenomenon through which, let's say you have a marketplace, something like eBay or Airbnb. There are buyers and sellers that meet. So the marketplace or the platform helps them meet on the platform, and then they take the transactions off the platform. So maybe they go to the platform once, the platform helps them discover each other. And then afterwards they say, you know what, let's just transact off the platform. And presumably the reason they do like this happens is in order to avoid the platform's transaction fees, right? So this is like the motivation for buyers and sellers to take transactions off the platform is like, okay, we got help by the platform, but rather than paying the transaction fees, we'll just go and negotiate some payment between ourselves and then do that off the platform. I should note, I call it leakage. I like the leakage term. I think it's also known, a lot of people call it disintermediation. Either one of those works.
Great. You mentioned eBay and others, but what types of platforms, marketplaces leak particularly a pressing problem?
Sure. So, the first thing is it's more of a problem the higher transaction fees you try to charge, right? And of course, most platforms and marketplaces, that's how they make a living. They try to charge a transaction fee. Now, if the transaction fee is very low, I guess the motivation to get off the platform is not as high. But there's a bunch of factors, right? There's a bunch of the elements which make leakage more or less severe. So we can go through these. So for example, imagine if the marketplace facilitates the transaction of very expensive items. Like say they're a marketplace for houses, or maybe they're marketplaces for jobs or something like that. So even if the marketplace charges something like 5 or 10% out of a very large item, like a very expensive item, that's a lot of money. So let's say if the house is, I don't know, $500,000, you take 5-10% of that, that's a few $1,000s. That's meaningful. And as a result, obviously the buyers and sellers have more of an incentive to circumvent the platform and try to transact outside of it. So I think that's the first one: expensive items or expensive transactions. Another one, which is very common, very important. What's the likelihood that parties want to interact repeatedly with one another? There's some marketplaces where you just interact, it's one-off transactions. So typically, say for Uber, if you take an Uber, typically you never see the same driver again, right? It's just very different circumstances. So the likelihood that you're going to try to engage in leakage is quite low because again, there's not repeated interaction. However, there's some other marketplaces where participants typically try to transact repeatedly with the same party. So this could be the case if it's, say, training or any type of training or coaching marketplace. I can go through examples, but say there's a company, we can talk more about it. So there's a company that I've been involved with for a few years now, which is called CoachUp, which helps people find coaches for their favorite sports. Let's say you like basketball, you want to get better at basketball, you can find someone who played basketball at a pretty high level that can give you private lessons. Well, obviously, in this case, you're trying to find a coach that you like, and the coach that fits what you're trying to learn. You're going to transact many times with the same coach, and as a result, it's like once you found the coach on the platform, there's a huge incentive for the coach and you to take the transaction off the platform. Now, the second part, so there's another piece of this, which also makes leakage particularly severe if the transactions take place in person, which in the case of coaching, it does, right? And yes, you meet on the platform, but ultimately you're going to do this offline. And of course, any type of marketplace where the transaction happens offline is going to make leakage more problematic. So let's see, expensive transactions, repeat transactions. Right, so I mean, there's a few others. So for example, in some cases, maybe the transaction is very clearly defined, like just before transacting. So say if you're, in the case of Airbnb, I mean, it's very clear what the transaction is. I'm trying to book Airbnb, like some Airbnb for a week or for a few days. There's not much to discuss between the host and the traveler, right? It's not like we have to meet in person and say, hey, what's the scope of the transaction? It's clearly defined up front. So in that case, I think it's better in the sense that there's less scope for leakage. Now, if on the other hand, there's some marketplaces where you still have to negotiate. So, okay, we meet on the marketplace, but then we still need to discuss a little bit, what is the scope of the transaction? And maybe, of course, if we have to do that negotiation in person, that makes it very difficult for the platform to keep the transactions on the platform. Let's say there's a marketplace like TaskRabbit or something like that, where you're trying to get someone to your house to repair, no pun intended, a leak, like there's something leak in your bathroom.
Right.
Well, that's also going to leak outside the marketplace, right? Because you don't know what the transaction is. We'll meet in person, and then the marketplace will actually eventually never know what actually happened.
Fascinating. So, to the extent that it becomes personal connection, interaction, certainly there's opportunities for leakage or disintermediation, because why not, right? You can just talk about the next appointment and Venmo money directly, and it can happen. But interesting on the Airbnb example, I suppose VRBO or others, do you think that's uniquely part of the value proposition, that it's somehow depersonalized and separated, so therefore it's an important value add, that it's you're not going to have leakage because there's value in the intermediary.
In transacting on the platform, you mean, right?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. So Airbnb is a good example. I mean, if you think about it, so actually useful to compare, say, Airbnb with something like booking.com, which is somewhat comparable, right? So I go to Airbnb to book private, like I want to stay somewhere that's like someone's house. On Booking, I go and book a hotel. Mm-hmm. So in the case of Airbnb, because you're booking someone's house, well, there's a lot of value that the platform can add to transaction, right? It's like, well, I don't know that person. So there's, they can offer insurance, there's escrow payments, there's all the stuff that makes you confident that you're not going to be scammed. And I guess this goes for both sides, right? It's like, so I book Airbnb, I pay, but my money doesn't go immediately to the host, right? I mean, they wait until I get there, and I have to basically confirm that yes, this is exactly what I booked. The host did not misrepresent the apartment or something like that, and vice versa. Of course, from the host's perspective, I mean, the platform does add quite a bit of value. For example, with insurance, there's a lot of benefits, like dispute resolution and other things. So it's very useful in that case for the platform to rely on the platform. But you could, sure, like especially let's say if you want to go to the same place multiple times, yeah, I guess you could take the transaction off the platform and say to the host, listen, let's just go outside, then we'll pay directly. But you realize, okay, well, what if something happens, I throw a wild party at your house, how do we apportion the blame? So obviously, like Airbnb is very helpful there. Right. Now, contrast this with something like booking.com. In case of Booking, because you're going to a hotel, hotels kind of have very good systems in place. Like, the hotel brand, so the chances of being scammed are much less, right? So in some sense, I would say Booking, like it's less clear what the value add of something like booking.com is to the transaction after, of course, the first thing that they do, they're very helpful with, they'll help you find the hotel at the, at the place you want to go for the dates you want to go. But once you found the hotel, it's not clear that booking can really help repeat transactions, right? If I know the hotel, like I might just as well book directly on the hotel's website. So it's not like, in some sense, so in that case, clearly, I think leakage is a much bigger problem for booking than it is for something like Airbnb, because it's not clear what booking can add, once they helped you discover a hotel.
Fascinating. That's so we've established the problem, and this is a good segue into what platforms can do about it, right? And what are the approaches? We've kind of touched on the value proposition, but is it possible? Let's start with, is it possible to completely eliminate leakage?
Yeah, so I mean, there's some very drastic measures you can take. So I mean, in some context, right? I mean, if you decide, okay, this is it's repeat transactions, they happen in person. I'm the marketplace. I'm not really sure what's gonna happen offline. You might just decide it's gonna be very difficult to provide incentives to keep the parties on the platform. And there's some platforms that came to the conclusion, okay, this is very tough. So what we might, in that case, what we could do is just completely eliminate transaction fees. So we're just gonna focus on helping the two sides discover each other, and we'll charge for it. So I'll give you an example. Think about Thumbtack. So Thumbtack is a platform, it's a bit like TaskRabbit, but it's typically you find contractors, again, to do stuff at your house. So something goes wrong at your house, you need a contractor to repair or to paint something, Thumbtack will help you find that. Again, this is there's a massive leakage problem here, because you'll find the contractor you like. Again, Thumbtack is not gonna be there when they show up to your house in person. I mean, you can tell them what the problem is, but they need to come to the house to assess it and give you a quote. It's unclear once you met in person, why should we still go back to Thumbtack, right? It's gonna be very difficult for Thumbtack to convince the parties to transact through it. So what Thumbtack does is they realize this, so they only monetize the initial match. So specifically, the way they charge is, I'm the customer, I go to Thumbtack, I say, okay, well, there's a problem in my bathroom, and I post it on Thumbtack, and then they charge the contractors for being shown that particular request, right? So they will tell the contractor, like, I will show you a request, and you need to pay, it's a referral fee. It's like, so if I show you the request, you have to pay some amount, like say $3 or $5 per, it's what's it called? Pay per lead, or like a lead generation fee. Yep. Once they show you once they show the contractor the customer requests, then it's completely up to the contractor, right? So of course they'll show you to multiple contractors, because they want to give the customer a choice. Mm-hmm. But essentially, until the contract is completely up to you. You need to convince the customer that you can do a good job, you can set your prices, but then Thumbtack steps out of the way, and you no longer need to pay them anything. So again, in this case, in some sense, they completely sidestep the leakage problem by charging something up front. Of course, there's a trade-off there. You're trying to charge something up front, so it means you can't charge too much, because from a contractor's perspective, okay, I'm paying per lead. I mean, that lead may or may not materialize, right? I mean, it's a bit, it's kind of riskier, but that's one way to do it. Other platforms, I mean, there are other examples of this where, I mean, it's platforms that basically completely eliminate transaction fees, and they charge, say, the sellers or whatever, the contractors, just for the privilege of listing. So there's a fixed fee, like I think Taobao in China does this. They have very low or sometimes no transaction fees. And as a seller, you just charge, like there's a listing fee, so a fixed listing fee to have your products there. And they also charge you if you want to advertise or promote your product, right? Because there's millions of products. So they'll charge, I guess, the sellers for promoting themselves to the top, but they don't charge per transaction. So again, it's completely, you kind of change the business model, you get away from transaction fees. Now, to be clear, again, there's something lost there. I mean, ideally, if I'm a marketplace, I do want, I mean, it's very obvious why I want to charge per transaction. It's the most natural way. Like if someone has more transactions, I mean, it just makes more sense to try to charge them as, some proportional amount per transaction. But if leakage is too difficult, then you might try something different.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be a real challenge for some of these platforms, because to your point, it's their business model, and that's how they survive. I guess you talked about, upfront lead fees or other fees, but how else do platforms survive in the face of such a challenge?
Right. So, I mean, this might be useful to go back to. I mean, maybe we'll use some examples here. I mean, so I think I don't think leakage has to be a fatal problem, right? I mean, there's definitely ways to get. I mean, in the worst cases, again, change the business model. There's definitely things that even platforms like, say, the one I mentioned earlier, CoachUp, they can certainly do some things to, to at least mitigate it. So, I mean, I think about it at a high level. So, assuming you still want to charge transaction fees, so you don't want to change the business model, I would put the various things you can do into two buckets. There's carrots and sticks. So you can try. So I mean, we can start with. I guess we can start with carrots, because I prefer that. So carrots is the idea is I'm just going to provide incentives to the two parties to keep the transactions on the platform. And just to be clear, there is a value. There's the initial value of coming to the platform to find each other, right? So there's the discovery. When we're saying carrots or incentives, it's assume you already found a provider or a buyer that you like on the platform. What can I give you? Like, I'm the platform, what can I give you in terms of incentives to keep subsequent transactions on the platform, right? So you already found someone you like. It's like, well, let's give people a reason to stay on the platform as opposed to transacting offline. So this is, as I mentioned earlier, something like Airbnb. I mean, there's lots of things, right? I mean, again, there's insurance, there's what else? Like scheduling, for example, the ability to manage people. Actually, I'll use an example here. There's a platform which I like because I think they do a very good job of addressing leakage. So it's called Style Seats. So it's a marketplace where I guess it's beauty professionals can, so they post their availability and they allow their customers to book like beauty appointments. Can be like hair salon, whatever, any other type of like beauty related services. And I mean, again, in principle, there's a massive leakage problem, right? You find a beauty professional that you like, you keep going there repeatedly, like it's unclear why you should go back through Style Seat. But Style Seat does actually provide quite a bit of value. So first of all, they have pretty low transaction fees, but they work very hard to give especially the beauty professionals, a lot of additional services that incentivize them to keep the transaction on the platform. So for instance, if you're a beauty professional, yeah, you could try to book the people like off the platform, but so the platform allows them to manage scheduling, to manage, for example, cancellations and no-shows, which is a big deal, right, in this particular industry. If someone doesn't show up, you can open up the appointment to other customers that you might have so that they can fill the gaps. There's for example, there's tools where you can take notes, like different people have different very idiosyncratic preferences for how the service should be performed. So the platform allows the beauty professionals to make some notes. Okay, this customer, when they come in, they like to have XYZ done. So it basically it's just like a tool that allows you to manage the transaction way better. So like, can you do this on your own? Sure, I guess you could have an Excel spreadsheet or something like that, and you can kind of cobble something together. But it's just like it's so much more convenient to have everything in one place. I mean, that's sort of that's the argument. So I would say that's like the gold standard is like, let's just do everything we can to make the transaction much better on the platform than outside the platform, like in person or something like that.
And sticks?
Oh yeah, so right, so okay, so this is basically, yeah, so this is carrots, and then, well, you can also do sticks, right? Now, again, I don't like sticks particularly by themselves because that just means basically trying to punish people for disintermediating. So I think like the natural order, the right way to do it is like, you just think of all the carrots you can provide. Now, in some situations, you do need to, provide some sticks. So sticks, I mean, the most obvious is, you can say like, if I find that you take transactions off the platform, I'll just delist you from the platform. Or like I will shadow ban you. I'm not going to show you. Of course, the problem there is you have to be able to identify leakage, which is non-trivial, right? It's like how can you be sure? Like, how can you be sure that someone's taking the transaction off the platform? So there's ways to see this. So I'm just going back to CoachUp. I work with this company, so I know it's a problem. So imagine on CoachUp, right? It's like there's a bunch of coaches, and they're intermediating coaches finding students, and there's a lot of leakage. Unlike style seeds, CoachUp I don't think does a great job at reducing leakage. So we can talk like what they could do, but the reality is they don't do enough, and there's a lot of leakage. And there's a question is like, we know there's a lot of leakage. We kind of have this idea, but it's like, it's not easy to identify. It's like, how do you know that a coach engages in leakage? Well, a very clear telltale sign. So you look at various coaches, and you can see that for some coaches, they basically have a lot of first transactions with students. Like they have a lot of students and then one transaction with each student.
Right.
And then like, there's no more repeat transactions, right? But they do get a lot of new students through the platform. Well, that's not a great sign, right? It probably means they use the platform to get new students and then they take the students off the platform. So, I mean, again, you're not sure, like it could be maybe the coach sucks or something, like the student doesn't come back. But again, if they do this repeatedly, you can probably be sure that there's definitely leakage going on. So yeah, so that's one. I mean, just, punish them based on the extent of observed leakage. There's other things, there's like, say, softer things. So for example, some platforms will try to make leakage harder by hiding information about the two parties. Now, again, I think this works, particularly if the transaction remains on the platform. So if you're trying to hide information, but the transaction has to happen in person, I mean, there's limits, right? I mean, if eventually we have to meet in person, it's going to be very difficult. Like I can try to hide information at the beginning up until basically, and maybe I can even force you to pay once, but once you meet in person, it's going to be very difficult. But on some platforms, I'll give you some examples. On some platforms, I guess it's possible just like, I'm going to hide the identity, or I'm going to make, I'm just going to hide the identity of the parties, and try to make it difficult for them to exchange contact information. So the one that I can relate to quite a bit is AngelList. So AngelList is a platform that I use a lot for angel investing. So you can think about it as a two-sided platform. On one side is startups and I guess syndicate leads, so people that bring the startups to their limited partners and help them raise money from the other side, which is individual angel investors. So I'm on this particular side. And so as an investor, you go there and you follow different syndicates, and they'll just constantly come up with show you startups, right? So they'll say, okay, here's a slide deck, here's a memo describing what the startup does, and then it enables you to choose and to invest in the startups that you like. Now, AngelList has very strict policies, and they always keep repeating this. As an investor, you're not allowed to contact the startup directly. You have to go through AngelList, and you have to go through the syndicate. I mean, they keep writing this in all caps, like every single time. It's like, and they're saying like, if you don't do this, if we somehow found that you contacted the startup directly, we'll take you off. Like, you're going to be banned from AngelList. And I can understand the rationale, right? I mean, I think they want to avoid, people see the startups and then they contact them directly, and they sort of try to fund the startups, make you an offer like outside of AngelList, and AngelList doesn't get to see the money. And I think in this case, so like they try to hide some of their information, but the problem is it's a bit hard, right? Because they do need to tell you a little bit the identity of the identity of the startup. So it's a bit, it's a little bit difficult. You do know it. So I guess, sorry, yeah. So I guess this falls more into the category of the first one. It's like the stick is very severe. It's like I will completely I will remove you from the platform if you try to go around this. So never mind. Yeah, this would be the first one. I was trying to find an example of a marketplace where they just hide information. I mean, I guess Airbnb does this to a certain extent, even though I think a little bit paranoid. I don't think leakage is a massive problem for Airbnb, right. But there's this thing where like they don't give you the phone number, where they keep telling you like you should not exchange phone numbers and emails. But to a point, at some point, it's ridiculous. It's like, of course, I need to exchange phone numbers because I need to coordinate them so we can meet in person, so we can give the keys. Get the keys. Yeah, that's exactly. So at some point this will happen, but yeah, they probably do this so that, I don't know, you don't contact them in advance, you don't conduct the transaction off the platform. it'll come back to me. So I mean, there are other platforms that do this like hiding of information. I'm sure it'll come back to me. Like I think of that.
Let me just pause for a second and really encourage the audience to ask questions in the Q&A box. Anything's acceptable question. Love to hear your thoughts and hope you're getting a lot of value out of this. Sorry, Andre, please continue.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, just to echo this, I mean, especially like people that are involved in startups or like, you know, this is, I mean, I do this quite a bit and I'm a pretty active angel investor. And yeah, this is one of the issues. So if I look at marketplaces and platforms, this will be typically one of the, you know, the top 3 questions I ask is how, I mean, I know how to think of it, but I also want to see how the founder's thinking about it. Is like, first of all, are they aware that leakage could be a problem? And especially what I want to see is like, how are they thinking about it? And you'd be surprised. I mean, what's interesting is like, you'd be surprised. Like some founders are like shockingly unsophisticated about this. It is quite amazing.
Oh, so let's pivot to that point. Yeah, there's a lot of great ideas or founders that have sort of a novel use case, I suppose, for platforms. But the consistent theme I'm hearing from you is that, you know, having that value add to both sides really, but especially to say the seller on the platform, like an Airbnb, you know, they're dealing with all of the, you know, screening. They're taking some insurance liability for the renter or the buyer. You know, they're giving third-party endorsement to the property owner. In the Angel List example you mentioned, perhaps the Angel List syndicate is providing some verification of, you know, qualified investor status to all the angels, to the founders and the startups, providing some other screening or consolidation. And there's other examples you mentioned that, you know, providing that value and that sort of service to both sides over and above just connecting is probably the next evolution, I suppose, right? Now, is this what you advise startups on?
Yeah, I think that's always, yeah. So I think that's always the starting, like this, I mean, this has to always be the starting point. I mean, it has to be like, you have to think about, I think a lot of startups initially they think about, okay, well, and it's natural, right? The first thing is like, okay, we need to, like, they're thinking about the first match, right? It's like, we're just helping, like, you know, there's a lot of value add in helping buyers find sellers or sellers find buyers. So they're like very focused on that. And again, this is like a step beyond this. Okay, well, you help them find each other. What prevents them from going off the platform once you've found them? And again, in some situations, it's one-off it could be one-off transactions, and that's fine, right? But in other situations, like you may be enabling long-term relationships, and it's unclear that those long-term relationships are going to stay on the platform. By the way, I mean, this is very, we should go through, there's a lot of examples of this, particularly say like B2B. I mean, I was just thinking just now, it just came to me. There's some very successful marketplaces. One of them is Fair.com. So it's a B2B marketplace that allows, like, I guess, like brick and mortar boutique retail shops, you know, like whatever, that have like interesting, you know, kind of items, source their products, right? So like interesting, like, you know, yeah, I don't know how it's, I don't know. Yeah, I think it's boutique, like boutique retail shops. So it's not Targets, basically, like small shops. They typically have 1 or 2 stores. And Fair.com is this like massive marketplace where those shops can go and then source, you know, the products that they want to offer from various brands, various sellers. So in principle, you can think about it, this is like, yeah, there's a massive leakage problem, right? I mean, if I'm a store, I found a few brands that I want, you know, I establish a relationship, like, why do I need Fair anymore? And again, like Fair, like you can go and look at their website. I mean, they're actually quite sophisticated in terms of, okay, let's try to add value in terms of insurance, like shipping. They have, so in this case, it's B2B. They have like payment facilities. Like, for example, they allow the, I guess the, I think it's, yeah, the retail shops like to pay in installments, but they would pay in some sense. It's basically like, it's almost like a financial product where obviously they make a margin. So the retail shops doesn't have to pay right away, but they can send the payment right away to the brands. So again, there's all these things that like essentially keep the transactions on the platform, even though it's a repeat relationship. So yeah, I mean, this is like, I think this is always like level 0. Let's just think about all the stuff that you can add.
Again, great example, providing added value and to the retailer to buy from many vendors, if you will, with one payment method, maybe one set of payments, et cetera.
Yeah.
So,
And just to, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
No, I was gonna say, so just to close the loop, because this is always in my head. So yeah, I love CoachUp. Like I absolutely love what they do. Is like it's online coaching. I really believe in this, and I've used it myself. It's like I think it's awesome. It's amazing. This is a good example of what cautionary tale of how like what not to do. I mean, essentially, like especially since I've known them for a while, they always thought like we can address leakage with sticks. Like it's basically like punishing coaches that take transactions out of the platform. And they never, I don't know, it's just like somehow they never took this seriously, like adding value. And I mean, it's useful to think about it. It's like, okay, you have these coaches. Yes, I understand that this is like, in some sense, it's the mother of all like leakage problems. You want to find the coach, like it's in person, it's repeat transactions. It hits all the, all the points that make leakage severe. But that being said, there's a ton of stuff you can do to add value. And I'm shocked that they haven't done it. So when I teach, I use this as an example in class. I mean, like students immediately come up with ideas, and I'm shocked they haven't implemented. So think about it. You want to coach for basketball, well, or football, whatever it is. Well, what about access to facilities? Like not everyone has access to a facility, especially if you're not in California. It's nice weather all year long. You may need access to indoor facilities. Well, CoachUp is in a great position to do this. They can go to whatever gyms and high schools or something like that, and then say, okay, well, how about we book a facility for 4 hours and then we reserve it for coaches that conduct a lot of transactions on the platform, right? So you're trying to incentivize coaches to keep transactions on the platform. You can also, for instance, tell coaches, the more transactions you conduct on the platform, the higher you appear in search results. So this is a little bit different. So this is like a different type of benefit. You're saying, well, every coach comes to CoachUp because they want to find new clients, but we're going to condition your ability to find new clients, to discover new customers on the number of transactions you conducted on the platform. So someone that conducts a lot of repeat transactions on the platform is going to be at the top, or is going to be more easily discovered than someone who doesn't do a lot of repeat transactions. And there's there's lots of other things they could do. And you can go and look at what they have now. It's like nowhere, like they don't do any of this. Like not to mention, of course, like digital tools where you can help, you can help the coach keep track of like, this is what I taught this person, and then, progress and things like that.
Mutual value add tools, great. I think Uber, right, they certainly prioritize their best drivers, and you earn prioritization in your area. And, the idea we mentioned earlier of, not either penalizing coaches in this example who don't have repeat bookings or rewarding those that do, that certainly makes a lot of sense, right? Right.
Yeah, so the only thing I would say is I think Uber, so they have some, but if you're Uber, you probably don't need to lose a lot of sleep on this, because I'm sure somewhere there's some person takes an Uber ride and say, hey, I'm going to the airport every week at 5 a.m. from my house. Okay, so can you come pick me up, and let's just, I'll pay you cash, and then you avoid the 20% fee. I'm sure that happens.
Sure.
But I have to believe that's a minority of minority. It's just not a major problem. It's mostly one-off transactions, not an issue. Someone like CoachUp, they do need to think about this, obviously, a lot more.
I love the example of gym time, because that way, the CoachUp can buy, a discount per hour, right? And sort of quote unquote resell it to the coaches and let them use it at partial rates, where maybe the coach couldn't even buy a half an hour from a local high school. They wouldn't do it, but they would give it 4 hours.
It would be a lot more expensive, right? The coach could do it, but it's just CoachUp can negotiate these block deals with the facilities, and they can just reserve them from their coaches. Oh yeah, right. Sorry, I just remember one thing. So again, not to beat up on CoachUp, is I love what they're doing. I really want them to succeed. Not least of all because I've invested in them, but also because I just like what they're doing. But there's another thing that bothered me. For the longest, so they had two, their solutions for leakage was always, okay, well, sticks, we're going to try to punish coaches. The other one, this is again, I share this with students in class, and it's really, it's a little bit funny. If you look at their fees, so instead of let's just add a ton of value and then think about transaction fees later, they're just playing these games with the transaction fees. So if you go look at their schedule of fees, they say the following. So the first time as a coach, the first time you conduct a transaction with a student, they take some, like, I don't know, 50% of that first transaction, because that's the initial match, right?
Mm.
And then basically they have a sliding scale of fees. So like the second transaction we take 30, but it's very random numbers. It's like starts 53%, then it's 37%, then it's like 18%, and then it's 7%. So the idea is like the more so you can see what they're trying to do is this idea is like the more transactions you conduct with a person, the lower our transaction fee. But again, it's still a transaction fee. You still haven't told me why I should pay any transaction fee at all, right? You should first think about like, what's the reason for me to be on the platform? And also the other part is like, these like ridiculous numbers, like it's 53, 37, 18, 8. It just feels really like they're trying to play games with these numbers without sort of like looking at the bigger picture. So I think it's a good, I mean, I feel like I'm conveying this, and again, I love CoachUp, but I think it's something that a lot of other startups can learn from. It's like, think about the fundamentals, and then you don't need to make the fees too complicated. That's not what's going to solve the problem.
Great. Well, we do have a few questions coming in. Louis, nice to see you as well. Hope you're doing well. Your question kind of a statement, but let's see if we can react to it. Louis says, great information. The thing against all online businesses is that they charge massive amounts for the same service. I can contract outside the platform. Well, yes, that's the leakage. Paying a hotel room, $200 on the platform and paying $120 directly during 10 days of vacation makes a huge difference. Plus, remember international fares, some countries, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so I mean, I can react to this. I mean, so I fully agree. I mean, I should have said this. So I mean, I think it's a good way to combine two things. So the first step is adds transaction benefits, right? It's like, just give me a reason to keep transactions on the platform. The second step is like, the reason you're doing this is because you're still trying to charge some transaction fee, right? So now, and I think the point that's being made in this comment is the transaction fee you charge should be reasonable relative to the benefit you're providing, right? And it is true that some platforms, and I think like I have in mind Booking.com, they charge very expensive transaction fees relative to the transaction benefit that they offer. And of course, like maybe there's some transaction benefit, but if you're charging, I don't know, 30% or 40%, it's very hard to justify that. So again, start with transaction benefits, but you should charge a fee that's, that people feel it's reasonable.
Great. Kip Malone asked, have you seen a difference in platform leakage based on B2B versus B2C platforms?
So, I mean, I think it's interesting to think about those. I mean, I guess, yeah, I mean, I guess it comes down to like all the factors that we talked about at the beginning. For example, like, do B2B platforms enable more repeat transactions than B2C platforms? So I think I definitely think it's relevant to both. Yeah, I mean, maybe like, this is why I mentioned Fair.com, which is B2B. There's lots of other B2B platforms. And I think maybe there's a propensity indeed, like in B2B marketplaces, for lots of reasons, tend to facilitate, I guess they're more likely to facilitate this kind of repeat relationship. So I guess on the one hand, in principle, so the leakage problem is more severe, but actually I would say in B2B contexts, there's probably more ways to add value. Like I said, there's a lot of there's financial, financial services that you can offer. So let's say the supply, like you're offering a payment facility to the supplier and to the buyer. Maybe like the supplier gets paid right away, but the buyer can't pay immediately. So I guess the intermediary can sort of like arbitrage that, plug in that gap. And that's actually a massive benefit that you can provide to be conducting the transactions of the platform. Not to mention, of course, insurance, like business insurance and all these other things, which I think tend to be more valuable in B2B context than in B2C context.
Interesting. Yes. Great. So our last question right now is from Preston Reed Borsma. Yes. Can you provide some intuition for why switching costs or cost to buy directly would be heterogeneous among consumers, which creates leakage and equilibrium in the baseline? So kind of heterogeneity or differential
So
costs?
I'm smiling because this sounds so. I don't know if Preston wants to comment on this. So this sounds to me like it's a question that's referred. So I have an academic article on this. So it sounds like Preston is referring to the academic article which has a model of leakage. So wait, let me just reread the question again.
It's
right. So yeah, why is, I mean, again, that's what I'm assuming. So Preston, you should correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're referring to the academic version of this. So I think just like high level, if you think about like people participating on the marketplace, it could be Airbnb or it could be any marketplace. I mean, I guess there's some people that just feel more comfortable taking transactions off the platform than others. I guess it's a question of like being risk averse or risk loving. Some people are just like, I just want the safety of transacting everything on marketplace because it makes me feel like, okay, there's insurance, there's all these things. Other people maybe care less about it, and they're like, okay, well, as long as I can get rid of the transaction fee, like I don't mind taking a little bit of risk and taking the transaction off the platform. I think that's the way to think about this heterogeneity, and I think it's very realistic. There's again, like some people just feel like, okay, I like the safety of I had a VC friend who used to call this. So transacting on the marketplace should feel like you're transacting in a very well lit room, like there's lights, everything feels safe, and then like leakage should feel like you're transacting in a dark alley at the back of the. It's like, yeah, I mean, you don't want to pay the fee to be in the to be in this like very nicely lit showroom, but then you're going to be transacting like you go into a dark alley at the back. Who knows what could happen, and again, different sellers, different buyers may value that risk a little bit differently.
Absolutely, but for well-designed platforms, they would add all of that value, thus making it the well-lit environment.
Yeah, I think that's the message, right? I mean, you should make your platform feel like the well-lit room, and you should make leakage or the transacting directly feel like you're going to be in a dark alley. Like you're going to be dealing drugs in a dark alley with no insurance. That's what it should feel like.
Right. Well, this has been great. Great information, great discussion. Would you like to make any closing comments, Andre?
Sure. I mean, there's a few things that were kind of random stuff that was popping in my head that I don't know if we touched. Let me see if I could. Oh yeah, there's one thing that came to mind as we're talking about these examples. I can't remember in what context, but one interesting question is: so, is it possible? Let me think. So, is it possible to have? Right. So leakage is particularly severe if the transactions happen in person, right? It's like, okay, we meet on the platform. This is true, Airbnb, Uber, like any of these. So typically it's like, there's a marketplace, it's online. We meet online, but like we get matched online, but eventually we transact in person. What about marketplaces which enable 100% online transactions? Like, is leakage less severe? And it just came to my mind. So in principle, right, if the transactions happen online, I guess you can say, well, on the whole, there's less opportunity for leakage because we're not going to meet in person. And this is where, for example, so this is where I was thinking about. This is where the platform can like fight leakage by not disclosing the information, right? Like there's no reason, for example, to connect you by email or by phone because, well, you're never going to meet in person. The whole point is to do this online. So, however, I do think that it's still possible that leakage can be an issue. And I was thinking of, so there are all these platforms that enable gig work online. So say Upwork or Fiverr or something like that. So you hire someone online to provide a service, which is, fully online. So I do think like in that case, leakage can be a problem. So if you have like, say, I need a web designer to do so I find the web designer through Upwork or through Fiverr. I like what they did to our company's website or small business website. You know what? I'm going to hire them again. And I want to hire them, say, like 5 hours a month or something like that. Why should we go back to Upwork? And even though you're not going to meet them in person, I think actually there's a leakage problem because, of course, they have an incentive to like take the contract and do it directly to avoid whatever fee the platforms are charging. So yeah, I mean, I think leakage can still be an issue, though I guess in some sense I would say it's more easily addressed because if you think about it, it's like I think there's more scope there for the platform to offer value than if you were to meet in person, right? Given that you're never going to meet in person, let's say you hire someone on Upwork, I mean, literally like in Russia or in like some, some very far, like country very far away. I mean, yeah, I guess you could hire them directly, but directly would mean you're not going to meet in person. So it's going to be via email. Like that really starts to feel very unsafe, right? It's like, what recourse do you have? Like if the party, like, at least if I meet in person, I know I can see you in person, just feels like, okay, I have some more control over it. But if it's on email, I don't know, it just doesn't feel safe. So I feel like, yeah, if the transactions are mostly online, I think it should be it should be easier to fight leakage.
So it sounds like that could be a second area where you might advise startups or existing platforms on how to add value and how to prevent leakage, right? If you're an online transaction platform, they'll have much less, ability, I guess, to go offline and to transact directly because of the nature of the service. And the downside, the dark alley, so to speak, is so much more severe.
Yeah, exactly. It's the dark alleys of the internet are always always riskier. Yeah, I think that's true. That's fair. I mean, it's not, to some degree, there's not much you can do about this because, I mean, it's the nature of the transaction. Like, is it like, I guess, I don't know, I have to think more about it. Like, is it true that I guess the majority of marketplaces, like the really big ones, there's an offline online element, right? I mean, maybe the matching app, but there's always like some offline elements. The purely online one, I mean, there's very few that are purely online.
Well, perhaps that's a growth area.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, anyway, so great advice for people thinking of startups or analysis of existing startups. Fantastic. It's been a great conversation. Any final words, or just wish people well and say thank you?
Thank you. No, I think that's great. Thanks for having me, and look forward to seeing the recording.
Yes, and thank you everybody for attending. And
yes,
again,
indeed.
happy Election Day, and thank you, Andre.
Thank you for the questions. Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everybody.